All right, well, welcome, welcome. I would love for you to type in the chat box any questions that you may have. I have been sent a couple of questions in from people who could not be on today's call. So I'm going to be monitoring the comments in the on the phone. Okay, so I'm going to start with just a couple of comments about concussion. It is certainly an evolving field, which is hard to keep up with all the information about concussion. Even a lecture that I would have given 20 years ago is no longer, it's in the trash can. We used to define concussion, the severity of a concussion, based on how long someone lost consciousness. Yet we know now that that happens less than 10% of the time. And, another thing we run into there's several myths about concussion. It's we don't do anything until all of our symptoms are gone. And now, we think very differently about that. It used to be you didn't go back to your activities until your headache was gone. Well, for some of you, that may be never. And then it went to 30 days. It was like more 3 months, and then 30 days, and then 10 days. And now we're looking at starting to gradually get back into activities 3 days after a concussion. Really activities that keep us kind of below what we call our symptom threshold. So if you start to do something that causes symptoms in those early phases, you just kind of stay under the radar on that, allowing yourself a recovery. Those 3 days of rest, 2 to 3 days of rest, though, are important. Another thing about concussion is that where do we hear about concussions? All the time. In sports, in the media, yet the most common cause of concussions are falls. So, car wrecks and whiplash-related injuries are other common causes, where sports-related is actually under that. So a lot of concussion-like symptoms related to, falling out of bed, slipping on the floor, certainly vehicle-related, whether that's falling off a bike, being in a car wreck. That is quite frequent. And that is where we're getting this crossover into more whiplash-related injuries. If you've seen the definition of a concussion, the more current one, it doesn't require a direct blow to the head. It can just, be kind of a whiplash, an indirect force. So I really set these up, these webinars up for you to have the opportunity to ask questions. So I will continue to, look for that. And I'll start with some questions that I received from people who contacted me and said, hey, I can't be on it, but this is a question that I have. And one of those questions is, my rehab made me worse. And how am I going to get better if I can't tolerate rehab? And anyone who's ever listened to me talk before, certainly in the space of dizziness, have said, once you've seen one person with dizziness, you've seen one person with dizziness. And in the concussion world, the same thing. Once you've seen one person with concussion, you've seen one person with concussion. So if someone asks me a question about a type of exercise that might work, then I may say, that may be a general application of an activity, but it may not obviously apply to everyone, because most people who are listening to these types of talks are listening because they have persisting symptoms. When, those who have made a full recovery are typically looking for solutions to their symptoms. So what works for one person may not work for another person. So recommended exercises, if they cause an increase in your symptoms, let's just say you have a dizziness and 0 is none and 10 is so bad you'd go to the emergency room, and you're at a 3. And you do an activity and it goes up to a 4, a 5. Once it gets to a 6, like a 3-point difference, then we're saying, okay, we need to back off this activity. And what's super important is how quickly do you recover from those symptoms. So we look at symptom recovery to guide therapy. When those symptoms come down within a few seconds to 5 minutes, and when you're in a therapy session, maybe at home, it might be more around 15 minutes, then, that we're going to probably stay in that activity. If it results in persisting symptoms, then, we need to modify it and go into something that will decrease symptoms. The other question I had was, why am I so triggered by flashing visual, like a video that may come across your feed? And they said, what's going on with my vestibular system when that happens? That is more related to visual, what we call visual motion sensitivity, visually induced dizziness. The inner ear is going to be more bothered by when we're in the dark, we're making a rapid head movement, when we start to lose our balance, we need to step on time. That's something else I'm going to talk about. Visually induced dizziness is, one of the theories around sensitivity, visually induced sensitivity, is when we don't feel good, our sympathetic nervous system, our alarm system is on. Whether that's emotionally we don't feel good, we have other illnesses, we're stressed, something hurts, is our fight or flight or freeze. Our sympathetic nervous system is fight, flight, or freeze. Our parasympathetic is rest, digest, and recover. So we have this kind of up-regulated sympathetic nervous system, or a down-regulated parasympathetic nervous system. And so trying to get the sympathetic nervous system down, the parasympathetic nervous system up. And, when we are in fight, that sympathetic nervous system response, fight, flight, or freeze, it's like when running from dinosaurs, and we're taking in as much visual information as possible, and auditory, what can I hear? What can I see? What's around me? And, looking in this like central, I'm staying in this central look, and I'm trying to hear, and we're taking in a ton of information. Those are reflexes. Those are protective reflexes, which means we're not in our higher evolved brain centers, whether that's, the way we process vision, balance, hearing. So we can have visual sensitivity, we can have noise sensitivity, and research has consistently shown when we're in that state that we can't learn anything. We can't learn a new strategy. We can't learn something, a way to improve something, when our sympathetic nervous system, alarm system is on. And I keep adding freeze because a few years ago they added freeze to fight or flight. So we think of fight or flight, I'm going to stay up and fight, I'm going to flee, or I'm going to there's this moment of freezing. And the freezing in the last couple of years with research has specifically been related to the cerebellum, which is the little brain back there, that has a lot of functions, and it has a moment where it freezes. It freezes when we have to plan something. It freezes, when we're even trying to plan a thought. And it's not that we're staying and fighting. It's not that we're running away. We're literally frozen. And that may be the time where we don't step on time and lose our balance. And so it gets in the way of utilizing the things we have. And so you may go be tested, and then when someone tests your balance, when they're testing it, in isolation, it tests well. But when your brain has to put it all together, there's some dysfunction there. So when I hear, you know, when I hear such a high sensitivity about visual stimulation, I'm really thinking that the autonomic nervous system is upregulated. You know, it's hot, a little bit hotter than we want it. There won't be a quiz on this, but there is an area of our brain, I think I even talked about it on the last one of these that I did, called the velocity storage mechanism. And we know very little about it in humans. It's where information all goes into and is stored. So I'll just start with one example, is we have an internal bobbing, rocking in our bodies, internally, normally. But this part of our brain suppresses it. It inhibits it so that we don't feel like we're rocking or bobbing. Our eyes are like computers just picking up every possible thing they can. We can't process all that. So this area of our brain picks and chooses and suppresses or inhibits some of that information so that we're not in sensory overload. Well, there is a growing amount of research that shows that area of the brain, not just in concussion, is affected, where we may be using too much visual information, we may be using too much auditory information, and you're not doing it on, you're not choosing to do that, your brain is doing that, and when we should be inhibiting it. So instead of relying so much on vision, we should rely on our body more, or touch more, or our inner ear more. And so it's a matter of keeping all that sensory input at bay. And that's most likely reason why deep breathing helps. So if you think about the box breathing, 4 counts in, hold 4 counts, like you're drawing a box, exhale 4 counts, hold 4 counts. That has shown to upregulate the sympathetic nervous system consistently in the research. And that's not the only breathing technique. But they're, grounding, just sitting down, feeling your feet on the floor. So there's other things we can do besides deep breathing, but it's a matter of us needing to downregulate our sympathetic nervous system. So when you think about exercises or visual auditory stimulation, we need to minimize that. And so, a go-to is, well, I'll just put earplugs in. Well, earplugs block it, but we don't want to just completely block the brain. So you could use noise-canceling headphones or get earplugs with a filter in it so that you can still hear, but there's some of that noise volume filtered out. I'm going to end up talking about another exercise. And again, I encourage you in the comment section, if you want to ask a question, please do. I'm monitoring that here. So I'm going to, until I see a question, I'm going to talk about, and this is not something I came up with, Emily Shopman, kind of retired neurooptometrist, now licensed professional counselor, does an amazing job in that's called brain spotting, and bringing in this concept of our visual system as it's attached to all parts of our body, our emotional system. And our emotional system is our amygdala, which is fight or flight. It's just one part of our emotional system. And that is this concept, I'm going to talk a little bit about physiology of sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the research has found that our sympathetic nervous system, our fight, flight, or freeze, so that's going to increase our heart rate, increase our blood pressure. We're going to bring in a lot of sensory information during those times. Again, it's a primitive reflex. And even though, we've evolved where we don't need to run from dinosaurs, we're dealing with more input and information in this time more than ever. So there is, even though we're not running from dinosaurs, there's still a lot of triggers out there that could really put us into our sympathetic nervous system. And it is central. So our sympathetic nervous system is directly tied to our central visual field. Our parasympathetic is our peripheral. So when you think about, like, let's say that I feel unsteady. I'm going to look down and I'm going to see, where am I going? What's on the ground? I'm afraid of falling. I'm going to look here. And I give really visually dependent in that central visual field. That is our sympathetic nervous system. If, blinking, when something comes at us, we blink, that's a sympathetic nervous system reflex. If you find yourself blinking a lot, especially when you try to go out into the periphery, that is a clue that you're more in your sympathetic nervous system, right? And that's a primitive reflex protective mechanism that we don't want to live in. We are not wired to live in this up-regulated sympathetic nervous system. It's only to be for short durations until we can find comfort and feel safe. So it's just, the alarm is always on. One of the activities that Emily Shopman, that I just mentioned, came to the clinic and spoke with us, is the importance to move our eyes into the periphery. Now, that means you're moving into your sympathetic nervous system. So it may not feel comfortable. Some people may even feel eye discomfort when they move out into the periphery. So there's, deep breathing. You can put, technique to downregulate your sympathetic or upregulate your parasympathetic. There is just grounding. There's types of therapies that can help. But one that we've been integrating more is moving into your peripheral visual system. But don't move it in to a space that brings discomfort. So if I look over there and see that something needs organized, and I move my eyes over there, it may bring more discomfort for me because I'm thinking about something I should be doing. That's not what we need to be doing. We need to be, maybe you have a picture. Emily likes to use colors, and even colors that have a nice texture to them, where you put a color out in the periphery. You can hold it, you can tape it up. You move your eyes out to something that brings pleasure, that's joyful, that feels good to you. Not move your eyes to an area that could bring stress. Or if you move your eyes to a certain area and you find yourself blinking, then that particular location that you're looking is giving you a signal that that particular eye position is even putting you more into your sympathetic nervous system, and that's not where you want to be. So it's about moving your eyes into the periphery, not through a head movement. Because if I move my head, I'm still in my central vision. If I move my head, your head is here, and you move your eyes into the periphery to a color, to a picture, to something that's joyful. And that's a technique that you can do throughout the day. I've had patients that they start to get stressed in prolonged online meetings, Zoom meetings. And so what they do is they put pictures on the edges of their screen or in certain parts of their screen where they can look that feels comfortable and relaxing, and it's a glance. Doesn't have to be there long. It's just go there and look for a second and come back to center. So there is a really strong connection between our central visual field, our sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze system, and then our peripheral, which is our parasympathetic, which is our rest, digest, and recover. The other thing about the central and peripheral visual field is the integration from central into peripheral is where we obtain visual spatial processing, meaning where am I in space? So yes, this topic was concussion, but when we think about some of the persisting symptoms from a concussion, it can be visual. It can be, and not just about seeing, but about our eyes moving. And so this is an important conversation about eye movements and central to peripheral. One of the, what we call a profile, so there can be a visual profile. There can be a migraine profile. And research does show notable visual sensitivity, auditory sensitivity in, headache migraines, or what we call vestibular migraines, which are, you don't have to have a headache. It can be dizziness with light and noise sensitivity. So again, that's vestibular migraine. There's also like what we call a profile in our mood and our emotional system. So when we think about our emotional system, when we think about our amygdala and our fight, flight, or freeze, it's important to know what types of activities can cause symptoms, what type of activities relieve symptoms. And so it's, other profiles of persisting symptoms of after a concussion is the neck, so cervical. And it's impossible to separate the eyes, the inner ear, and the neck. They have intricate neural pathways. Even these little neck muscles here help eye alignment, the cervical ocular reflex. We've got the vestibular ocular reflex, which means that starts in your ear, goes to your brain and talks to all your eye muscles. And that, both our neck and our inner ear is highly connected to our visual system, and our visual system is thought as 80 to 90% of what our brain processes is connected to our visual system. So we think about all the visual influences in life, how busy things are, screens, moving things on the computer. Then if our fight, flight, or freeze system is on, we're going to be taking in a lot of that information and not suppressing it or inhibiting it like ideally that we would want to. Again, we have to think of our bodies, or our eyes is picking up as much information in our world as possible. And if we didn't have a part of our brain that suppressed that, inhibited that, we would be in sensory overload. And so some of you may feel like you're in sensory overload. So what we need to do is find ways, instead of stimulating your visual system, stimulating your inner ear, overstimulating activation of neck muscles, is getting things calmed down. I don't see yet any questions coming through. Just yesterday, I'll share an example. Is someone had a concussion in 2021 and had residual problems with migraine, and not able to go back to her original, like being able to work out. do things that she once did without thinking. But she said, I really have learned to manage these things, and was working, and was referred to our clinic. And so we found some things, and we were like, oh, here's some exercises for it. And so we shared, you know, gave a home program, and then in this follow-up, then I modified it. Someone saw her, and then I modified it, and came back yesterday and said, I feel like I'm worse. And so what we had done is, as I had increased the intensity of an exercise to really move into more stimulating activities, visual stimulating, vestibular stimulating, it was really starting to set off these headaches again. And with pain or with headaches or not feeling well, it doesn't have to be pain, is going to turn that alarm system on. And again, we don't learn anything new when our alarm system is on. And so it wasn't that I was saying, well, there's just nothing we can do for you. It's learning to manage your symptoms. And she had gone through a process of maybe redefining a new life, a new type of, okay, I can't do that, but I can do this. It is more important than me giving an exercise that is causing too much stimulation. So I think, as a vestibular therapist, we have a tendency to think about activities that cause symptoms and then do this gradual exposure. And I will do that with the next patient, unless someone comes in and I can tell they're really in their sympathetic nervous system. Then I'm going to be focusing on activities like grounding and moving slowly the eyes into the periphery before too much visual stimulation. So I hope that answers the questions that were sent in about why am I so visually sensitive. And I will add, quality of movement is really important. So if you've been given an exercise and, to do it, your shoulders are in your ears and you're guarded, and now the neck muscles they're firing too much, then I don't want that activity, because I don't want an overfiring of neck muscles. So the brain's like, man, I don't want to be dizzy. I know what it feels like to move my head. And so I'm going to tighten my muscles and I'm going to move a little stiffer, when what's most important first is quality of being able to move out without overactivation of these muscles. So thinking of how one activity affects another system is super important. Okay. I hope that helps. If no one has any questions, just some take-home messages about concussion is just one thing I want the world to know is concussions just don't happen in sports. I mean, most concussions occur from falling. A lot of concussions occur from car wrecks or falling off bicycles. So a whiplash. There is a movement in the research world and treatment world of, a concussion is considered a mild traumatic brain injury. A traumatic brain injury is when imaging can detect a bleed, or was there a fracture, but there was something that can be seen on imaging. Standard imaging will classify a traumatic brain injury. Whereas a concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury, not because your symptoms are mild, but because standard imaging doesn't show anything. And then you have these residual symptoms, or maybe there's some clinical, what we call signs. Maybe we measure your balance is off, or we measure your eye movement and your eye movement's off, or we look at your neck and there's dysfunction with your neck, in addition to symptoms that you may have post-concussion. And so we really want to increase the conversation around concussion, not just being sports related, and that's certainly where most of the research is, but thinking about, how the way we move our eyes. A lot of people say, well, I went and had my eyes checked because I thought it was my eyes, but they said my vision's okay. And I'm not, the eyes are way more than vision. It's like, how do they move? How do they move in together? How do they move out together? How does it feel when they move out into the periphery? How is it when you look at extreme ranges? So we want assessing eye movement is critical. But there is, and speaking of movement, there is this movement that it could potentially not be a brain injury. Could this be a neck injury that can result, like a whiplash injury, can result in the same symptoms as a brain injury? When we think about the inner ear, it can have shearing forces that result in vestibular-like concussion, meaning it can result in, it's called a labyrinthine concussion, which is the sudden onset of vertigo lasting hours to days with residual symptoms of dizziness and steadiness. Some can be nausea. It can be post-traumatic fluid problems of the ear. There can be structural problems of the ear related to concussion. And in fact, I did a podcast earlier in the week on this. You can access it from our website, 360balance.com. We have a header at the top on podcasts, and you can get the script. I provide a handout on the different types of concussion profiles. We also want to look at, has there been, a change in your autonomic nervous system? Is it easier to move into fight, flight, or freeze? Is your heart rate going up with little activity? If that's an indicator that there's an autonomic nervous system response, an elevated response. So no profession owns concussion. There's no one thing to look at. Everyone's unique. Even if symptoms sound similar, treatment approaches to those symptoms can vary very widely. Okay. All right. Well, if that's it, and I don't see any comments, I thank you so much for joining us. I apologize for the little technical difficulty earlier in the day, or earlier at the time of the recording. So thanks for hopping back on. And I do these once a month, so you can always put in a comment about a topic that you want to hear about, and I'm happy to cover various vestibular related topics. Thank you so much.